Hey guys, we're back again with the Battle for Azeroth Balance Druid guide. So just quickly, the goal for this guide is to help newer players pick up this spec, or returning players to kind of figure out what has changed with the spec itself. The topics include rotations, talents, consumables, and then a quick start / TLDR at the end of the video for returning players that can jump in kind of quickly. Just so you guys know coming into this, I'm not going to specifically talk about Azerite traits or trinkets as they are most likely to change a lot in the upcoming weeks. If you guys need specific information on Azerite pieces or trinkets or whatever, check the description for associated guides. And with that said, let's just jump into the guide. So first thing we're going to talk about today is the rotation. There's a general priority list for Moonkim whenever we're talking about rotation, and the priority list comes as follows. So number 1, don't ever go over the Astral Power cap. Astral Power AP is your main resource and has a cap of 100. If you ever go over this Astral Power cap, then you are losing significant amounts of potential damage. This is alleviated by either casting your spenders of Star Surge on single or 2 targets, or Starfall on 3+ targets. That's how you just make sure that you're definitely not capping. Always be casting. Number 2 is always be casting. Make sure you're always filling your GCDs with at least some ability. That will help you see a huge increase in your DPS. I cannot tell you how many times I look through people's logs, and the biggest thing that they can do to improve their damage is just filling every global. It will literally make a difference just making sure that you're always casting something, regardless of what it is. Number 3, maintain 100% uptime on your dots. Making sure Moonfire, Sunfire, and Stellar Flare, if talented, never falls off is a pretty big deal since the damage per cast of these abilities is really high. In the same vein, not overcasting these dots is also important. Follow the pandemic dot refresh timing, which is 30% of the dot duration, meaning 7.2 seconds for Stellar Flare, 6.6 seconds for Moonfire, and 5.4 seconds for Sunfire. That will allow for maximum efficiency of these dots and the best possible damage output from them. Pandemic dotting, if you guys don't know, basically allows you to refresh your dots at 0 cost, which is under 30% of the duration. And then the fourth and final thing is not allowing yourself to cap empowerments. A large majority of your damage in Battle for Azeroth is going to come from Solar Wrath and Lunar Strike and their associated empowerments. Do not let yourself cap these empowerments, and you also need to be mindful of Eclipse. Eclipse being whenever you cast Lunar Strike or Solar Wrath, you have a 20% chance to grant the opposite side empowerment, meaning if you were casting a Solar Wrath whenever you're at 3 Lunar empowerments, you could be wasting DPS as if you get the Eclipse proc, and it'll just completely waste a Lunar empowerment from you. Okay, and that is the end of the rotation priority. Now we're going to go through a general opener for a single target encounter. This opener goes as follows and is shown on the screen. Use Solar Wrath 2 times in the pre-pull, as it will allow for the most out-of-combat DPS. You start these Solar Wrath casts at negative 2.5 seconds. Then you will cast Moonfire and Sunfire, and if you have Stellar Flare talented it, now is the time to apply that as well. Then you will cast Solar Wrath until you pass 40 Astral Power, in which you will pop your cooldown of Celestial Alignment / Encarn. After you pop Celestial Alignment, then you will use your cooldowns of Fury of Elune, Force of Nature, or Warrior of Elune, whichever you have talented. Then you will begin casting Star Surge, and follow the priority of casting listed prior to this in the rotation section. You can see me following the priority on the screen right now, and if you have any more questions in regards to this, feel free to ask in the comment section. So yeah, I'm following the rotation, the general rotation of not allowing myself to cap empowerments, maintaining 100% uptime on my dots, always be casting, filling all my globals, and not going over the Astral Power cap. Generally speaking, if you want to improve your damage, understanding what you're casting is way more important, and then making sure you're actually filling globals will increase your damage far more than any other tip about how to do the rotation perfectly. So now we're going to move on to the talent section. I'm going to show you a few talent builds and explain what they're for. So first off is leveling and world questing. So for the tier 15 row, Force of Nature is recommended for leveling and world questing. Generally speaking, if you're doing solo content, Force of Nature in the Treant Taunt itself is very powerful, especially for solo content. Warrior of Elune, if you were in group content, that choice can be very good. And if you're doing more 5-man groups or whatever, or you need burst DPS, Nature's Balance is also very strong as well. So all 3 of these talents on this row can be taken, but if you're in solo content, I would very, very much recommend Force of Nature. So tier 30, Tiger Dash. Tiger Dash is really good for open world content, allows you to get from place to place very quickly. Decent short cooldown on Tiger Dash. Really good talent overall. Restoration Affinity. So the general choice in this row is between Restoration Affinity and Guardian Affinity. Restoration Affinity is generally better because it gives you self-sustain outside of combat, allowing you to heal up pretty quickly outside of combat. And then as for the tier 60 row, Typhoon. Typhoon is just a generally all-purpose, pretty decent talent. Knocks back and displaces enemies, making it very useful generally speaking. Soul of the Forest. So while leveling and world questing, Soul of the Forest is going to be pretty good because it gives you the minus 10 cost reduction on Starfall on cast. It allows you to like burn down mobs pretty quickly. Since you're not pulling like 1 to 2 mobs, there's no need for Star-Lord or Incarnation. And generally speaking, mobs don't last long enough for Incarnation anyways. So Soul of the Forest is generally very strong here. Twin Moons. For the tier 90 row, Twin Moons. This row generally is non-competitive. For the most part, Twin Moons is pretty overbearing in terms of its viability and its damage-wise. It's very strong for single target while being the best talent for multi-target. And then for tier 100 row, Fury Balloon. Fury Balloon allows for burst DPS, which is very good while leveling and world questing. Additionally, it is the top talent on 3+ targets or any damage profile in which you need burst, which generally speaking, leveling and world questing is that damage profile. And so that is the end of leveling and world questing talents. Now it's time to move on to Mythic Plus talents. So starting it off, we have the tier 15 row of Force of Nature, Nature's Balance, and Warrior Balloon. All three of these talents are viable. I personally recommend Force of Nature as, generally speaking, for pug tanks and generally for new content. Force of Nature is going to be very strong as it gives your tank a little bit of breathing room. However, if you're doing a little bit lower level dungeons, Warrior Balloon is probably pretty good. And if you're doing dungeons with large downtime in between packs, such as Eye of Ashara was in Legion, then Nature's Balance could be very useful. So now we're moving on to the tier 30 row. The general all-purpose talent for this row is going to be Wild Charge for most things. The Disengage from Moonkin form plus the dashes and other forms is just too strong. Additionally, it's on a 15-second cooldown. Tiger Dash could see usage in some Mythic Plus, but however, the Wild Charge, generally speaking, will be your go-to for Mythic Plus. And now moving on to the next row, Guardian Affinity. Guardian Affinity with the 6% passive DR plus the additional healing of Frenzy Regeneration is very strong in Mythic Plus as a whole. If you're doing like lower level dungeons, Restoration Affinity could see usage, but generally speaking, Guardian Affinity will be what you want. And then moving on to the tier 60 row, Typhoon. Typhoon and the displacements in general are very, very strong, especially whenever you displace enemies to cancel casts. This is pretty good for Moonkin and it allows you for better utility inside the Mythic Plus dungeon itself. And as for the tier 75 row, Soul of the Forest. The general choice here is Soul of the Forest versus Star-Lord. However, Soul of the Forest is generally speaking going to be a little bit better, especially for burst DPS on AoE, while being pretty competitive on single target with the other rows. Star-Lord is always a little bit behind Soul of the Forest. However, it requires you to maintain good uptime, whereas Soul of the Forest is just like a lot of burst DPS, which is pretty strong in Mythic Plus as a whole. And now moving on to the next row, Twin Moons. As stated in the leveling and world questing section, Twin Moons is by far the best talent for this section. Without Stellar Drift getting buffs or Stellar Flare needing like a better target scaling, Twin Moons will always be your go-to for this row, generally speaking. And then now moving on to the last row, Fury of Balloon. Fury of Balloon allows for a lot of burst DPS. Shooting Stars, unfortunately, has a diminishing returns on multi-target now, so meaning the more targets that you have dotted up, the less astral power you're getting. So generally speaking, Fury of Balloon and this burst AoE damage profile that it allows for you is going to be your go-to. If you're running with the DK or a Demon Hunter, you should wait until they grip the mobs together before you pop your Fury of Balloon. And if you're using Force of Nature, drop your Force of Nature as well so that they'll stay inside your Fury of Balloon for the full duration. And so with the conclusion of the Mythic Plus talent section, we're moving on to the general / all-purpose talent section. So I decided to list a few all-purpose talents that will generally get you through a lot of the content and especially are good for you to like jump into newer content. And these talents are as follows. So we have Warrior Balloon. This will generally speaking be one of your better options, especially allowing you for more mobility from the tier 15 row as a whole. Wild Charge, 15-second cooldown on a disengage. It's very powerful and pretty good in most situations. Guardian Affinity, 6% passive DR is too strong, plus the Frenzy Regeneration for whenever you need a quick heal and a pinch. Typhoon, the displacement, generally speaking, will be the best utility on this row outside of niche situations. Star-Lord, best on 1 to 3 targets. So generally speaking, most of the time you only have like 1 to 3 target encounters or whatever anyway. So Starlord will generally be one of your better talent options on this row. Twin Moons, best on hybrid fights, best on 2 targets plus. You're always going to talent this talent unless you're on pure single target. Fury Valoon, the only choices here is between Fury Valoon and Shooting Stars, and I think generally speaking Fury Valoon fits damage profiles inside of Raid or Mythic Plus or general all-purpose talents a little bit better than Shooting Stars does as a whole. Okay, so with the conclusion of general all-purpose talents, we're going to move on to the single target talents. We're going to kind of skip over the utility talents and more focus on the damage talents and when you should take them. This is going to be for Patchwork single target, but I will kind of explain when you should take and when you should take whatever else. So starting with the tier 15 row, we have Force of Nature. Force of Nature and Warrior Valoon are kind of close, but Force of Nature does edge out Warrior Valoon by a little bit. Generally speaking, if you need more mobility or whatever, like inside of a raid encounter, then you should take Warrior Valoon. Starlord is by far the best option on single target. The only competitive option is Incarnation Chosen Valoon, and if you have a lot of downtime on an encounter, Incarn could be better than Starlord. Stellar Flare, as explained above, Stellar Flare is really close with Twin Moon on single target. So generally speaking, if there's ever a second target or any time that you need to spam Moonfire or anything else, you should definitely talent Twin Moon. However, Stellar Flare is the optimal option on one target. And then for the final row, Shooting Stars. Shooting Stars is the best option on 1 to 2 targets, and even 3 targets if they're spread out far enough. However, Fury Valoon, if you ever need burst damage, or if the targets are stacked up 3+, it's generally better. However, Shooting Stars is better on 1 to 2 targets. And now with the conclusion of single target talents, we're going to move on to multi-target talents. Again, similar to single target talents, we're only going to focus on the damage impactful talents and less on the utility itself. So the first row, Warrior Valoon or Nature's Balance. Warrior Valoon is best on 2 to 4 targets, while Nature's Balance is best on 5+. However, if there is significant downtime on the boss or a mob where you're not getting benefit from or value from Warrior Valoon, then Nature's Balance could also be better. I know I've raid tested Vectis a little bit. There's a large amount of downtime on that boss, so Nature's Balance could be useful over Warrior Valoon on that encounter. So for the tier 75 row, Soul of the Forest or Starlord. Starlord is good on 1 to 3 targets, while Soul of the Forest is on 4+. If you also need burst DPS, Soul of the Forest might be a little bit better, as it allows for you to layer Starfalls a little bit more quickly. However, if there are bouts of single target, then Starlord is probably going to be a little bit better of an option for you. And then as for the tier 90 row, Twin Moons is going to be your go-to option pretty much all the time on AoE, unless for some reason that the mobs are spread far enough out that you're not getting any benefit out of Twin Moons except for the Moonfire damage, where you need Stellar Drift's increase on Starfall radius for some reason. And then moving on to the final row, Shooting Stars is good on 2 targets or spread out targets where you will not benefit from the Fury Valoon outside of one singular target. Outside of that, Fury Valoon will be the best option for clumped up targets and do like significant amounts of priority damage. And so then that concludes the multi-target talent section. So I kind of went through these usage and when to take the talents as opposed to like what these talents actually do and how to optimally use them. If you would like to see more thorough analysis of each talent individually, you can click the guide in the description to try to understand a bit more thoroughly about how these talents will be used. I did go through and just kind of give you examples of when I will use them or when they should be used though. So now we're going to move on to stats. As for stats, Intellect is your primary stat and should virtually be on all of your pieces except for rings and the occasional trinket. As far as secondary stats go, Haste is by far your best secondary stat, and Haste scales very well with your dots, cast time, gaining Eclipse procs, pretty much everything. Crit and Versatility are tied for your second best secondary, as they are pretty good damage modifiers for your abilities. And then Mastery scaling and the Mastery coefficient in general for balance is incredibly lackluster in its current state, putting Mastery at your worst secondary stat. So generally speaking, you should be looking for Haste pieces, but do not try to sacrifice a lot of item level to get Haste. As for enchants and gems, you should be enchanting your weapon with Quick Navigation. You should also be enchanting your ring with Enchant Ring Pack of Haste. Do keep in mind that they have removed neck enchants and cloak enchants moving into Battle for Azeroth, so don't be looking for those. And then as for gems, there's one unique equip intellect gem called Kraken's Eye of Intellect. For all other sockets, you should put Quick Owl's Eye, as it gives haste. Seems fitting. Quick Owl's Eye, Moonkin, haste. Seems good for me. Finally, for potions, flasks, and food. For potions, you should be using the Battle Potion of Intellect, which grants 900 Intellect for 25 seconds. This potion is incredibly powerful when paired with your Burst of Celestial Alignment or other cooldowns. really creates for high burst windows. As for flasks, Flask of Endless Fathoms, it's really the only intellect flask and thus is the best for use to use as like a Moonkin and as a caster. And then for food, you have a couple options. You have a Bountiful Captain's Feast, which grants a large amount of intellect, but is very expensive early on in the expansion as it is a feast and also feeds 20 players or 25 players or so. If you're looking for solid personal food, then Swamp Fish and Chips gives haste. It's pretty solid, especially early on in the expansion, is also pretty cheap overall. So moving into the last part, the quick start guide slash TLDR. If you have watched the video up until this point, it might be a little bit repetitive for you. At the same time, I do hope it helps as well. Maybe you'll get a blurb of information that you otherwise did not notice. So here's an all-purpose talent tree that'll get you started in most places. It consists of Warrior Valoon, Wild Charge, Guardian Affinity, Typhoon, Star-Lord, Twin Moons, and Fury of Loon. I'm not going to go over this individually, as you guys can go back and watch the previous section of talent breakdowns and kind of understand why I would be picking these talents, but this will be a good general talent tree that'll get you started for most things. A quick rotational overview is as follows. Don't cap Astral Power. Maintain 100% uptime on your dots. Don't allow yourself to cap empowerments. This is generally speaking a very good rotational priority for yourself. If you need more thorough analysis on this rotational priority, you can go watch the rotational section. Some extra tips to follow when doing your rotation is don't sit on your cooldowns for too long. Holding on to Celestial Alignment, Fury of Valoon, Force of Nature, or Warrior Valoon for too long will hinder your DPS, generally speaking. Refresh your dots with 30% of the duration left, so 7.2 seconds for Stellar Flare, 6.6 seconds for Moonfire, and 5.4 seconds for Sunfire. And then the final thing I can recommend is be wary of movement and research the fight beforehand. Knowing your fight and when movement will come up will allow for you to properly prepare by pooling resources such as Warrior Valoon for movement. The general stat priority for most people is as follows. Intellect is greater than haste, which is greater than crit, which is equal to versatility. So crit and verse are equal, which is very much better than mastery. So mastery is pretty low down on the totem pole right now. And then on the screen are the enchants and gems you were looking for, and they're going to be as follows. Weapon enchant, you're going to be looking for quick navigation. Ring enchant, you're going to be looking for pack of haste. Gems, you're going to be looking for one Kraken's Eye of Intellect as it is unique equip, or quick Owl's Eye whenever you have other sockets available for haste. And then, on that note, that is the conclusion of the Battle for Azeroth Moonkin guide. Remember that I'm not covering Azerite pieces or trinkets, as those will be pretty volatile in the next upcoming weeks, and they will be covered more thoroughly in a written guide, linked down in the description, as well as in-depth analysis of the talents if you guys need something like that. And then with that said, thank you everybody for watching. If you'd like to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe. I'm going to put my Twitch, Discord, and Patreon down in the description, so make sure to check that out if you guys enjoyed the content, and hope everybody has a great day.